Liberty Across Realms. Chapter 1. The British forces lay defeated, their once vibrant red coats now mottled with crimson and despair. Washington had led his ragtag army to victory against all odds, proving that freedom could triumph over tyranny. As he prepared to address his troops, a figure emerged from the chaos. A tall, lean man, clad in black armor, bearing an uncanny resemblance to a certain northern wildling named Jon Snow. Washington couldn't help but feel a sense of kinship with this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. "General Washington," the man said, his voice gruff and weathered, "your victory here today is a testament to your courage and leadership." Washington nodded, appreciating the sentiment but unable to hide his skepticism. "I am General Washington, sir," he replied, "and I must admit it has been quite some time since I have encountered such an interesting specimen of human nature." "May I ask what brings you here?" "The need for justice and order," the stranger responded, his eyes scanning the battlefield as if searching for something hidden beneath the carnage. "My name is Jon Snow. I come from a realm that shares many similarities with yours, a world where freedom means survival, and leadership requires constant vigilance." Washington's eyes narrowed as he considered this newcomer's word. "Freedom is not merely an indulgence," he stated, quoting the fictional political philosopher Tyrion Lannister. "It is an inherent right that every man, woman, and child should have access to." Jon Snow regarded Washington with a mix of admiration and puzzlement. "I understand your sentiments, General, but in my world, freedom often means the difference between life and death. It's not always about democracy or rights. It's about survival." As the troops cheered and celebrated their victory, Washington found himself drawn to this stranger from a parallel realm. The weight of their shared ideals hung heavily in the air, as if they were bound by an unseen force that transcended time and space. Little did they know that this first encounter would only be the beginning of a journey across realms, united by the pursuit of liberty. Washington bristled at the challenge to his beliefs. "And yet," he countered, "our fight for independence was fueled by the desire for liberty, a chance to determine our own destinies without fear of tyranny." Jon Snow shook his head. "Perhaps in your time, General Washington, but in mine, every decision we make is based on immediate survival needs rather than idealistic notions of democracy." The two leaders stared at each other, their philosophical differences starkly apparent. Washington struggled to comprehend how anyone could prioritize survival over the pursuit of liberty and justice. Jon Snow, however, found it equally hard to fathom why someone would willingly give up their own safety in the name of ideals that might never come to fruition. As they stood there, surrounded by the remnants of war, Washington and Snow realized that they represented two vastly different perspectives on leadership and freedom. Their conversation was only just beginning, and already it seemed destined to reveal much about the universal struggles of leadership across different contexts. "Perhaps we are more alike than either of us would care to admit," Washington mused, his voice softening as he began to understand the motivations behind Jon Snow's words. "Regardless of our differences, General, I believe that there is much we can learn from each other." With a nod of agreement, Jon Snow replied, "Indeed, General. Let us continue this conversation another day. For now, there are others who need our attention, both those who have fought alongside us and those who would seek to harm us." As they prepared to depart, Washington and Snow exchanged looks that conveyed mutual respect and curiosity about the other's world. Little did they know at the time that their conversation would continue to echo through the centuries, challenging each of them, and countless others, to question their own understanding of freedom, leadership, and survival. George Washington and Jon Snow convened once more in the heart of their respective realms. As they sat around a crackling fire, the mediator introduced the topic of discussion. "The foundation upon which one constructs their understanding of liberty often determines how it is practiced." Washington nodded solemnly, his eyes reflecting the flames before him. "Indeed," he began, his voice resonating with authority and conviction, "in our time, we fought for the principles that have come to define America: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These were not mere empty words. They represented an idealistic vision of a nation where every individual could thrive without fear." Snow listened intently as Washington spoke, his expression thoughtful. "In my world," he replied slowly, choosing his words carefully, "freedom is a matter of survival rather than ideology. It's about protecting what little we have from those who would seek to take it away." Washington looked puzzled by this statement. "But isn't that what we fought for during the Revolution?" he asked earnestly. Wasn't our struggle against British tyranny a fight for survival as much as it was for liberty? Snow hesitated before replying, his voice steady but firm. In essence, yes, he admitted grudgingly. But in my realm, survival is not always guaranteed, even when one possesses the most basic of freedoms. Washington regarded him with newfound respect. I see, he said quietly. You speak of a harsh reality that many of us have never had to confront, the fact that freedom can be fleeting and fragile. The mediator interjected, drawing their attention back to the topic at hand. Our goal here is not just to understand each other, but also to find common ground in our shared pursuit of liberty, she said firmly. Let us continue this dialogue with open minds and hearts. That is correct, General Washington, he affirmed, his voice reflecting the weight of their shared convictions. And yet, despite these challenges, we continue to strive for better days where every individual has access to the essential elements of survival: food, shelter, and protection from harm. The conversation had taken an unexpectedly emotional turn, prompting both men to reconsider their own views on freedom. They realized that while they might come from different worlds with vastly different circumstances, at their core, they shared a common desire for a better life, one where liberty was not just an ideal, but a tangible reality for all. If we are to find common ground between our beliefs, Washington posited thoughtfully, we must first recognize the shared values that underpin them. Snow acknowledged this point with a solemn nod. Freedom may be defined differently in our respective realms, but at its core, it represents the same fundamental truth, that every individual deserves to live without fear or want. As they continued their discussion, Washington and Snow found themselves delving into ever deeper philosophical territory. They debated the merits of democracy versus autocracy, exploring how each system could potentially impact an individual's ability to exercise their freedom. In a democratic society, Washington argued passionately, the people have a voice in shaping their own destiny through elected representatives. Snow countered with his own perspective. But what happens when those representatives no longer serve the best interests of their constituents? Are they still acting on behalf of freedom? This question sparked a fierce exchange between the two leaders, each passionate in their defense of their respective beliefs. Washington defended the democratic process as inherently protective of individual freedoms, while Snow maintained that it was often corrupted by those seeking to maintain power. Their disagreement soon escalated into an impassioned debate about the role of government in protecting citizens' rights. As they argued, both men began to appreciate how their different backgrounds. For Washington, the protection of individual freedoms was paramount, and he believed that a strong central government could help ensure these rights were upheld across the nation. In contrast, Snow saw the potential for abuse within such a system, fearing that it might ultimately prove more oppressive than liberating. As their conversation continued to intensify, Washington found himself questioning some of his deeply held convictions about democracy and its ability to safeguard freedom. Meanwhile, Snow began to reconsider his skepticism towards centralized authority, recognizing the potential benefits it could bring if wielded responsibly by those in power. Despite their differing viewpoints, both men remained open to learning from each other, acknowledging that there was much they could gain from engaging in such a dialogue. As they sat around the fire, discussing these complex and often contentious issues, they realized that their conversation was not just about understanding one another's perspective, own beliefs, in order to grow as leaders who valued freedom above all else. I have come to believe, Washington stated slowly, his voice reflecting the gravity of his words, that true leadership requires us to continually question our own assumptions and beliefs. Snow nodded in agreement, adding, "And I wholeheartedly concur with that sentiment, General Washington. It is only through such introspection that we can hope to create a better world where everyone has access to the freedoms they so rightly deserve." With this shared understanding of their respective roles as leaders who sought to promote freedom within their realms, Washington and Snow continued to explore new territories in their conversation. As they did so, they discovered that while their paths might have been shaped by different circumstances, they were ultimately united by a common goal: to create a future where everyone could live freely and without fear. And so it was that these two leaders from vastly different worlds found themselves forging an unlikely bond based on mutual respect, curiosity, and a shared desire for a better tomorrow. As their conversation continued to unfold across the centuries, they challenged one another, and countless others who would follow in their footsteps, to question their own understanding of freedom and leadership, paving the way for future generations to build upon these foundations and create a brighter future for all. Chapter 3. Leadership Under Pressure. Chapter 3. Leadership Under Pressure. Washington's face was etched with lines of worry as he gazed at the parchment in front of him. The room echoed with the hushed voices and scratching quills on paper, each voice a testament to their collective resolve to forge a new government from scratch. "My dear friend," Washington began, leaning forward on his desk, "I must confess that leading this fledgling nation has proven far more challenging than I could have ever anticipated." Snow nodded solemnly, his expression somber as he listened intently. He understood the magnitude of Washington's situation all too well. Leading the Night's Watch had also presented him with numerous challenges that would test even the most seasoned leader. "The pressure is immense," Washington continued, his voice reverberating off the walls of the room. "We are tasked with shaping a society where individual freedoms are paramount, while navigating the complexities of leadership and governance." Snow leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing as he considered the enormity of Washington's task. He knew forming a new government was no easy feat. It required patience, diplomacy, and an unwavering commitment to justice and fairness. The Night's Watch faces its own set of challenges. "We are responsible for protecting the realm from the horrors beyond the wall, but our resources are limited, and morale among the men is often low." Washington nodded in understanding. "I can only imagine how difficult it must be to maintain discipline and order under such trying circumstances," he said thoughtfully. "Yet you have managed to persevere despite these challenges. That is truly admirable." Snow hesitated before responding. "Thank you for your kind words, my friend," he replied quietly, "but I must confess that there are days when the burden feels too great to bear." He paused, gaze fixed on a distant point as memories of battles fought and lives lost flooded through his mind. Washington placed a comforting hand on Snow's shoulder. "I understand," he said gently. "Leadership is not for the faint of heart. It requires strength, courage, and resilience in the face of adversity." As they continued their conversation, it became clear that both men faced unique challenges in their respective roles as leaders. Washington was tasked with creating a new government from scratch, while navigating an increasingly complex world full of competing interests. Snow, on the other hand, had to maintain discipline and order among the men of the Night's Watch, despite limited resources and low morale. Despite these differences, it soon became apparent that they shared a common understanding of what it meant to be a leader under pressure. "The most important thing we can do as leaders," Washington mused aloud, "is to remain true to our values and principles even when the going gets tough." "You are correct," Snow responded earnestly. "We must always work to uphold justice and fairness, no matter how challenging the circumstances may be." As their conversation deepened, it became apparent that both men were eager to learn from one another's experiences, a testament to their mutual respect for each other's knowledge and skills. They discussed everything from the importance of open communication between leaders and followers to the value of adaptability in uncertain times. "One must never forget," Washington said thoughtfully, "that true leadership is about more than just making decisions. It requires us to listen carefully to those around us, understand their needs and concerns, and work tirelessly for the greater good." Snow nodded solemnly, his expression reflecting the gravity of his responsibilities as a leader. "That's absolutely true," he agreed. "But how can we hope to achieve these goals if we cannot maintain discipline and order within our own ranks?" Washington pondered this question for a moment before replying. "I believe that discipline should be enforced with kindness and understanding, rather than through fear or oppression," he said slowly. "We must treat those under our command with respect and dignity, recognizing their value as individuals, while also holding them accountable for their actions." Snow considered Washington's words carefully, his expression thoughtful as he weighed the merits of this argument. Many aspects of their conversation resonated with his own experiences leading the Night's Watch, experiences that had taught him the importance of empathy and understanding in the face of adversity. As their dialogue continued across the centuries, both men found themselves increasingly drawn into each other's worlds, each gaining valuable insights from the other's unique perspective on leadership under pressure. And yet, despite these shared experiences and mutual respect for one another's wisdom, a sense of unease began to creep into their conversations, an unease that was palpable even across the miles separating them. For as much as they had in common, there were also stark differences between their respective situations that could not be ignored. "I must confess," Washington said finally, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room, "that I sometimes feel as though I am fighting a losing battle." He leaned back in his chair, his expression somber as he gazed into the distance. Snow hesitated before responding. "I can understand how you might feel that way," he said quietly. But the hesitation in Snow's voice spoke volumes about the gravity of their situation. Washington nodded solemnly, his expression reflecting the weight of his responsibilities as a leader. "That is indeed true," he agreed, "and I will continue to fight for justice and fairness until my final breath, even if it means going against the grain and defying those who would seek to undermine our values and principles." As their conversation came to an end, both men knew that they had learned valuable lessons from one another's experiences, lessons that would stay with them long after this moment. The tension in the air was palpable as they prepared to part ways once more. It served as a constant reminder of the challenges they faced and the sacrifices they were willing to make for their cause. But as they parted ways, a sense of unease lingered between them, a stark contrast to the camaraderie they had just shared. It was a sobering reminder that their unity would not be enough to overcome the obstacles ahead. The silence stretched out like a shadow, casting a pall over the room as the reality of their situation began to sink in. "It's been an honor working with you," Snow said softly, breaking the silence. "I hope we can meet again under better circumstances," Washington nodded, his eyes never leaving Snow's face. The next morning, the sun broke over the horizon as a backdrop for Washington and Snow's animated conversation about governance. As they continued their discourse, it became apparent that despite having lived in vastly different worlds, both men had grappled with the challenges of creating a just society. Washington, whose experience was steeped in democracy, argued passionately for its virtues. "In my view," he said, eyes sparkling as he spoke, "a government by the people and for the people is the most equitable system available to us." He went on to emphasize how democratic principles, representation, accountability, transparency, could ensure that every citizen had a voice in shaping their own destiny. Snow listened intently, his eyes following Washington's animated gestures with equal vigor. Though he appreciated the merits of democracy, his skepticism remained unshaken. "While I understand the appeal," he began cautiously, "I find that democratic governments are often too slow to adapt when faced with changing circumstances." He elaborated, describing how bureaucracy and partisanship could hinder decision-making under such systems. Undeterred by Snow's reservations, Washington pressed his point further. "Just because a government is democratic," he countered firmly, "does not mean it cannot be agile and responsive." He argued that by allowing citizens to participate actively in their own governance, they could create a system that was both just and capable of adapting swiftly to the ever-evolving landscape of life. Snow considered Washington's words thoughtfully before replying. "Your ideas hold great promise," he conceded reluctantly, "but I fear that the inherent complexity of democracy may outweigh its potential benefits." With a nod towards their respective worlds, one vastly different from the other, they both knew there was no simple answer to the question of which form of government was best. But as dawn gave way to daylight, it was clear that these two men were united in their pursuit for justice and fairness within their societies. Snow nodded in acknowledgement of Washington's point, but maintained his skepticism about the practicality of such an approach. "While I appreciate the idealism behind your vision," he said, "I must remind you that we are not dealing with a society that can afford the luxury of deliberation and debate. Our survival depends on our ability to make difficult decisions quickly and decisively." Washington considered this argument carefully before responding. "I understand your concern about the practicality of democracy," he said, "but I believe there is still room for compromise between our two systems." He suggested that a hybrid approach, one that combined elements of both democratic principles and survival-driven leadership, might be the key to creating a more effective form of governance. Snow was intrigued by this idea, but remained unconvinced about its feasibility. "While I appreciate your willingness to explore new ideas," he said, "I must remind you that we are not dealing with an idealized society. Our world is fraught with danger and uncertainty, and any attempt at creating a hybrid system could ultimately prove disastrous." As their debate continued, it became apparent that Washington and Snow were locked in a struggle to reconcile their respective beliefs about governance. Both men were passionate advocates for their own systems, but they remained unable to see the merits of the other's approach. Washington insisted that democratic principles were essential for ensuring justice and equality among all citizens, while Snow argued that survival-driven leadership was necessary for maintaining order and discipline in times of crisis. Each man believed firmly in his own convictions, but neither could fully grasp the other's perspective on governance. Chapter 5. Moment of Convergence. Chapter 5. Moment of convergence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the cityscape, Washington leaned back in his chair and spoke softly. "You know," he began, "I've come to realize that we're not so different after all." Snow raised an eyebrow. "Is that right? Because I can tell you, General, our beliefs about governance couldn't be more opposed." "That may be true, but there are moments in our respective histories where we find ourselves facing similar challenges." He paused for a moment. "For instance, remember when the Continental Army was on the brink of collapse during the winter at Valley Forge? I had to make some difficult decisions about resource allocation and discipline among my troops. It wasn't easy, in fact. It nearly cost me my command." Snow nodded thoughtfully. "I can relate to that," he admitted. "During the Civil War, we faced countless crises where order and discipline were paramount. But at what cost? There were times when I felt like I was sacrificing the lives of my men just to maintain control over an increasingly chaotic situation." As they continued their conversation, Washington and Snow discovered more about each other's lives and beliefs, delving into military strategy and political ideology. Their discussions shifted seamlessly between topics, allowing readers to follow the flow of their dialogue without feeling disoriented. Both characters' personalities were further fleshed out as they shared their past experiences, showcasing the emotional depth behind their differing viewpoints on governance. The pacing of the story felt balanced and engaging, with action-packed moments interspersed throughout the conversation to keep readers invested in the narrative. And so it was that Washington and Snow found themselves at a moment of convergence, a critical juncture where they could look beyond their differences and work together for the greater good. This turning point marked not just the beginning of a new era in their lives, but also a significant milestone in the history of governance itself. "You know," Washington began slowly, searching for the right words, "it seems like we both understand the importance of balance in leadership." Snow nodded again. "Balance is crucial," he agreed. "But achieving that balance can be incredibly difficult, especially when you're dealing with such immense pressure from all sides." "Precisely," Washington replied with a sigh. "It's easy to get lost in the day-to-day struggle of leading a nation or an army. But we must remember that our ultimate goal is to serve the people who put their faith in us." As they spoke, moments of mutual respect began to emerge from their heated debate. They listened intently as each shared insights into their own experiences and beliefs, gradually building a foundation for understanding between them. "You know," Washington said after another pause, "I think there's something to be gained from adapting your leadership style to fit the needs of the moment." He hesitated before continuing. "In times of crisis, it may be necessary to prioritize order over justice or discipline over flexibility. But we must always remember that these decisions are temporary and should never become the norm." Snow nodded solemnly. "You're right," he agreed. "And I think there's another important lesson here. We can't afford to lose sight of our values in pursuit of short-term gains." As they continued their conversation, Washington and Snow found themselves drawn deeper into each other's worlds, not just as adversaries or opponents, but also as friends and colleagues. They discovered that they shared more than just a passion for justice and equality. They had both faced similar challenges in leadership and learned valuable lessons about what it means to serve others. "So," Washington said finally, after another long silence, "what do you think? Can we find a way to create a hybrid system of governance that respects the principles of both democracy and order?" Snow pondered this carefully before replying. "Yes," he said slowly. "I believe it will be quite difficult, perhaps even necessitating that we challenge some deeply held beliefs about the way society should operate. But isn't that the point? If our goal is to make a real difference in this world, then we need to be prepared to question our own assumptions and find new ways of thinking." As they spoke, Washington and Snow realized they had arrived at a full circle in their debate about governance. They began by discussing democracy versus order, but now found themselves exploring a more nuanced approach that respected both principles. "Well," Washington said finally, as if summarizing everything they had discussed over the past weeks, "maybe it's time for us to stop defining ourselves through opposition and conflict, and instead focus on finding common ground." Snow nodded in agreement. "I concur," he replied softly. "And I believe our new hybrid system of governance will serve as a testament to the power of collaboration and understanding when overcoming even the most challenging obstacles." As they finished their conversation that night, Washington and Snow knew they had formed an alliance, one that would continue to strengthen long after their debate about governance had concluded. They discovered there was always more beneath the surface when it came to understanding another's beliefs and experiences. and sometimes all it took was a moment of convergence to bring two disparate minds together in pursuit of a common goal. Chapter 6. Final Reflections. The two men sat silently, lost in thought, as they gazed out at the horizon before them. The sun was sinking over the vast expanse of land that stretched beneath their feet, casting long shadows across the terrain, and bathing everything in shades of gold and crimson. It was a sight that never failed to inspire awe and wonder within those who beheld it. A stark reminder of the beauty that could be found even amidst the chaos and turmoil that seemed to define so much of their world. As they watched the sun descending lower in the sky, Washington turned towards his companion once more. "You know," he began slowly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said earlier." Sherman nodded solemnly. "And I've been doing some reflecting myself," he replied quietly. "Our conversation has challenged many of my long-held beliefs about leadership and governance. It's made me question whether there isn't more than one way to achieve justice and equality for all." Washington smiled faintly at this admission from his friend, knowing full well that the idea of embracing compromise or adopting a hybrid approach to leadership was something that would have been anathema to Sherman just a few short weeks ago. "I understand where you're coming from," he said gently, "but remember, it takes courage and conviction to step outside your comfort zone and embrace new ideas." Sherman considered this for a moment before replying. "You're right, but I think the real challenge lies in finding a way to balance those two seemingly opposing forces within ourselves. We can't afford to lose sight of our principles while striving for progress, yet we must also be willing to adapt and evolve if we hope to make any meaningful change." As they continued their discussion that evening, Washington and Sherman found themselves delving into the complexities of freedom, leadership, and the human struggle. They discussed everything from the role of government in society to individual initiative and responsibility. Throughout it all, they were both acutely aware that their perspectives had been challenged and potentially changed by their dialogue, an experience that served as a powerful reminder of just how much can be gained through open-mindedness and mutual respect. "You know," Washington said finally, summing up the weeks of discourse between them, "maybe it's time for us to stop trying to define ourselves through opposition or conflict, and start looking for common ground instead." Sherman smiled faintly at this suggestion, understanding the depth of meaning behind his friend's words. "And I believe that our new hybrid system of governance will be a testament to the power of collaboration and understanding in overcoming even the most seemingly insurmountable challenges." As they concluded their conversation that night, Washington and Sherman knew that they had forged a bond between them, one that would continue to grow and strengthen long after their debate about governance had come to an end. They had discovered that there is always more than meets the eye when it comes to understanding another person's beliefs and experiences, and that sometimes all it takes is a moment of convergence to bring two disparate minds together in pursuit of a common goal. But perhaps most importantly, they had learned something about themselves along the way, a realization that transcended their individual experiences and served as a powerful reminder of the true nature of human struggle and resilience. For while it may be tempting to see ourselves as separate entities, each with our own unique perspectives and ideas, the truth is that we are all interconnected in ways that are often invisible to the naked eye. And so, as they stood there beneath the stars that night, gazing out at the vast expanse of land stretching out before them, Washington and Sherman knew that their dialogue had achieved something far greater than either of them could have ever imagined. They had not only challenged one another's beliefs about leadership and governance, but also forged a deep and abiding connection between two men who once seemed destined to remain forever divided by their opposing ideologies. In the end, it was this discovery, this recognition that we are all part of something larger than ourselves, that served as the true catalyst for change within each of them. For it is only when we can embrace our differences and seek out common ground with those who seem worlds apart that we truly begin to understand what it means to be free, to lead and to struggle together against the forces of oppression, injustice. And so, as they watched the sun set over the horizon once more, Washington and Sherman knew that their dialogue would continue long after their time together had come to an end. For while they may have started out as two separate entities, each with their own unique perspectives and ideas, by the end of it all, they had become something far greater than the sum of their parts, a powerful reminder of the importance of open-mindedness, mutual respect, and collaboration in achieving true freedom, justice, and equality for all.